As the world's population increased, people rejected God and became evil and corrupt. Only Noah and his family chose to walk with God and be made righteous. To judge the violence, God said there would be a global flood. Noah obeyed God's instructions in building an ark. All those who believed God and entered the ark lived, but those who refused rejected the only way to be saved. Years later, God chose Abraham to go to the land of Canaan and become the father of a great nation. God said that all people would be blessed through him. Even though his wife Sarah was barren and both of them elderly, the Lord miraculously gave them their son, Isaac. Years later, in a divine test, God provided a ram to die in Isaac's place, a dramatic illustration of the ultimate provision that would one day be given for the world. As the years went by, Abraham's son Isaac had a son named Jacob. As an adult, God gave Jacob a new name and called him Israel. Israel had 12 sons. And the families of these 12 sons grew into what became known as the 12 tribes of Israel. But when a famine ravaged the land of Canaan, they went to live in Egypt. There, the children of Israel lived as strangers in a country that was not their own.
The ruling Pharaoh of Egypt feared that the Israelites might become too numerous and too powerful, so Egypt enslaved them. Exodus 1:14 says, "They made their lives bitter with hard labor in brick and mortar and with all kinds of work in the fields. In all their hard labor, the Egyptians used them ruthlessly." And in order to control the Israelite population, Pharaoh gave this order to all his people: "Every boy that is born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live." It was during this tumultuous point in history that a baby named Moses was born to an Israelite family. By faith, his parents dared to defy the king's edict and hid the baby for 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Then, Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her slave girl to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. "This is one of the Hebrew babies," she said. Then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" "Yes, go," she answered. And the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you." So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son.
Egypt was a world power in that day. But as a nation, they had rejected the one true God. They had exchanged the truth of God for a lie. And they worshiped and served created things instead of the Creator. And historians and archaeologists have carefully documented the Egyptian culture and way of life, giving us more background information to the events that take place in the following passages. You see, the Egyptians didn't worship God, who created the Nile River. They worshiped the river itself and even offered a national sacrifice of a boy or a girl each year to appease Happy, the Nile god. And they had a host of other false gods. Among them was Heket, the frog-headed goddess of life and birth. There was Hathor, the cow goddess, Shu, the god of the sky, and the sun god, Ammon-Re, chief of the Egyptian gods. Egypt had strayed so far from the truth that even Egypt's ruler, the Pharaoh, had declared himself to be a god king. As Moses grew up in Pharaoh's palace, Acts 7:22 tells us that he was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and action. For Prince Moses, Egypt appeared to have everything: military might, influence, prestige, and power. But Moses knew that there was only one true God, the creator of the heavens and the earth. And this eternal God had promised to one day send a deliverer. For Moses, following God and believing this promise was of greater worth than all the treasures that Egypt had to offer. So Moses made a decision. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God, rather than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a short time. You and I also have a choice to make. And like Moses, following God may not be easy, but it will be of greater worth than all this world has to offer.
Scripture tells us that one day, in an attempt to bring justice in his own strength, Moses killed an Egyptian. As a result, he had to flee the land of Egypt. For 40 years, he lived far off in the land of Midian. But God had not forgotten his promises to his people. And in God's perfect timing, one day, on Mount Sinai, God spoke to Moses from a burning bush. The cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing me. So now go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. God assured Moses that he would be with him, giving him the courage to face the Pharaoh. For God would be the one to rescue his people and bring them out of Egypt to worship him on that very mountain. This is what you are to say to the Israelites: I am has sent me to you. This would be the name by which his people would know him. For God is not the I was, nor the I will be. Rather, he is I am, eternal, unchanging, and all-powerful.
It would not be easy, however, for Moses to face the Pharaoh and tell him that the Lord demanded the release of the slaves, Egypt's source of free labor. God allowed Aaron, Moses' brother, to go with him into Pharaoh's presence. When they confronted him, Pharaoh said, Who is the Lord that I should obey him and let Israel go? Pharaoh was insulted that the God his slaves worshipped was telling him what to do. So Pharaoh said, I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go. In contempt and anger, Pharaoh then increased the toil of the slaves and made it even more bitter. But Pharaoh had mocked God by asking, Who is the Lord? His question was about to be answered by God himself. Aaron threw his staff down in front of Pharaoh and his officials, and it became a snake. How did Aaron's staff turn into a snake? By the power of God. But Pharaoh wasn't impressed. Pharaoh then summoned wise men and sorcerers, and the Egyptian magicians also did the same things by their secret arts. Each one threw down his staff, and it became a snake. How did the sorcerer's staves turn into snakes? Well, according to the Bible, there are only two sources from which supernatural power is available: from God and from God's enemies, Satan and the demons.
The sorcerers may or may not have known that they were relying on demonic powers to produce their snake. They may have even been proud of their powers. But remember, the Bible tells us that Satan is a liar and a deceiver. And although he is completely evil and wicked, he can appear harmless in his offer of solutions or power. Satan can even masquerade as an angel of light. However, his intentions are always to use people for his own evil purposes and destroy them in the process. That is why the Bible urges us to go to God alone and strictly prohibits calling upon any force or power other than God.
According to Deuteronomy 18:10 and 11, God warns his people against anyone who practices divination or sorcery, interprets omens, engages in witchcraft, or casts spells, or who is a medium or spiritist, or who consults the dead. God says that these practices are detestable and urges us to put our confidence in his promises and trust in him alone. Let's see what God does in verse 12. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. There is no power greater than God's power, and God always has the victory.
Yet Pharaoh's heart became hard, and he would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said. At that moment, God could have stretched out his hand with one plague and simply wiped Egypt off the face of the earth. But God had other plans. Chapters 7 through 12 describe a series of 10 plagues that God brought upon Egypt. Each one demonstrated the power of God. To the Israelites, God had said, I will free you from being slaves to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment. I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God who brought you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians.
God's heart, however, was not only for Israel. God wanted both the Israelites and the Egyptians to know that he was the one true God. Exodus 7:5 tells us, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring the Israelites out of it. The Egyptians had put their trust in a multitude of false gods. And Numbers 33:4 explains to us that the Lord had brought judgment on their gods. He began by striking the Nile and changing its water into blood. Surely the Egyptians' unquestioning devotion to Happy the God of the Nile, began to waver. Later, when the Lord struck all the cattle of Egypt with a plague, Hathor, their cow goddess, proved to be completely helpless. When the Lord sent hail and lightning that caused massive destruction throughout Egypt, Shu, the god of the sky, did nothing. And Ammon-Ra, the sun god, showed himself to be completely powerless when for 3 days God set total darkness throughout the land of Egypt. Darkness so thick that it could be felt. An eerie display of the darkness within a human heart that had rejected the light of God's word.
Each plague showed the Egyptians that the false gods in whom they trusted were completely incapable of saving them. Yet, the heart of the Pharaoh, who was himself considered a god king, remained hardened through them all. So, Moses said, "This is what the Lord says. About midnight, I will go throughout Egypt. Every firstborn son in Egypt will die. From the firstborn son of Pharaoh who sits on the throne to the firstborn son of the slave girl." At midnight, the Lord would send the death angel to strike down the firstborn son of every household.
There was only one way to escape death. God said, "Each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household. The animals you choose must be year-old males without defect. Do not break any of the bones. Select the animals for your families and slaughter the Passover lamb." Take a bunch of hyssop, dip it into the blood in the basin, and put some of the blood on the top and on both sides of the doorframe. Not one of you shall go out of the door of his house until morning. When the Lord goes through the land to strike down the Egyptians, he will see the blood on the top and sides of the doorframe and will pass over that doorway. He will not permit the destroyer to enter in your houses and strike you down. What if that day somebody heard God's message through Moses, but then did not put blood on their doorway? Would simply knowing the truth be enough to save them from death? No. Knowing God's message was not enough to save them. They had to also believe it and then apply the blood to their doorway. What if someone else decided that instead of putting blood on their doorway, they were going to put up a sign? And on that sign, it would say, "We are good people. We are religious. We give to the poor. We are law-abiding citizens that seek to live at peace with everyone."
Maybe you too have thought that God will accept you based on these same qualities in your life. But what would happen that night when the angel of death passed over that home? Would God be so impressed with that person's good deeds and spare them? No. Egyptian or Israelite, poor or rich, good or bad, none of those things mattered on that night. Before God, only one factor determined whether they lived or died. If a lamb, perfect and without blemish, had died in their place, God said, "When I see the blood, I will pass over you." The Israelites did just what the Lord commanded Moses and Aaron. At midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sat on the throne, to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon. all of Egypt could see that Pharaoh was not a God king after all. Tragically, by proudly refusing to listen to the one true God, Pharaoh lost his own son. Verse 31 says, during the night, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "Up, leave my people, you and the Israelites. Go, worship the Lord as you have requested." Each of the previous plagues had been an incredible display of the supernatural power of God. It was during the 10th plague, in the silence of the night, that their freedom was gained. God's people would forever remember the events that led up to their deliverance: certain death, only one way to be saved, an innocent lamb dying so that they might live, no broken bones, shed blood, the power of the enemy broken, slaves set free. There were about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. But the Israelites were not the only ones who left Egypt that day. Verse 38 says, many other people went up with them. Just as God had planned, many of the Egyptians must have seen the futility of their false gods and chosen to believe the one true God, who is Lord of all the earth. But Pharaoh's heart was still hard, and in chapter 14, he said, "What have we done? We have let the Israelites go and have lost their services." All Pharaoh's horses and chariots, horsemen and troops pursued the Israelites and overtook them as they camped by the sea. But this too was in the sovereign plan of God. And to the terror-stricken Israelites, Moses said, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left.
When the Egyptians saw that the Israelites were escaping, verse 23 says, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen followed them into the sea. But God didn't allow the Egyptians to even get close to the Israelites. He threw their horses into confusion and even caused the wheels of their chariots to fall off. And when all the Israelites had safely crossed, God told Moses to extend his hand out over the sea. And when he did, the waters flowed back and covered the chariots and horsemen, the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea. Not one of them survived. The Israelites had now been totally freed from the bondage to the Egyptians, never to be enslaved by them again. The Lord had fought for them and had given them total deliverance. God miraculously preserved the life of a Hebrew baby named Moses. As an adult, he made a choice to follow the one true God. For Moses, this decision held possible suffering and loss. He realized, however, that Egypt's pleasures were temporary, but the reward of following God would be eternal. Perhaps you also face a similar decision. The choice to follow God will be just as worth it for you as it was for Moses. When Pharaoh refused to free the Israelite slaves, God demonstrated his power over the Egyptian gods in a series of supernatural events. When God turned Aaron's staff into a snake, Pharaoh's sorcerers also transformed their staffs into snakes. They did this by relying on the power of demons or false gods. God then sent 10 plagues on Egypt, each one showing that the false gods the Egyptians worshipped were completely incapable of saving them. Satan and the demons have always sought to entice people into invoking their power through sorcery, witchcraft, and divination. But God strictly prohibits this in His Word. When you need to turn to someone for help, remember that there is no power greater than the power of God. He loves you and wants you to rely on Him alone.
During the 10th plague, God sent the death angel to strike down the firstborn son of every household. But He also provided a way for the son to be saved. God said that if they took a perfect lamb, killed it, and placed its blood on their doors, the firstborn son would not die during the plague. The lamb became a substitute for those who believed God and did as He instructed. These dramatic events were pointing to the future, when God would provide a substitute who would shed His blood for you in order to give you eternal deliverance.